We had sold millions and millions of albums, played sold-out concerts thousands of times and stuff like that around the world. Westall hardly had any money to show for it. It was one of rock's most famous partnerships, Geezer Butler and Ozzy Osbourne, stuck together by the raw dark magic that made Black Sabbath a legend. But underneath the heavy guitar sounds and sold-out stadiums, trouble was building for years, bubbling up in backstage hallways and hotel rooms until it finally exploded. Geezer, always the quieter, more thoughtful guy, had kept his sundry feelings bottled up for decades. But no, the dam has burst open. And what comes out is not a story of friendship, but instead of betrayal, craziness, and wounds that never really healed. It was as if the same fire that once held them together had turned against them, burning away trust and leaving only smoke. From there, the change began. Once friends in spirit, now they stood on opposite sides, saw an invisible war zone. In the beginning, Ozzy was the scrappy working-class kid from Aston with a raw, wild voice that could shake the ceiling and a talent for craziness that seemed cool at first. Geezer looked at him almost like a younger brother, drawn to his wild charm and fearless stage presence. But as the band's fame grew bigger, that charm began to rot from the inside. The drugs stopped being a backstage fun thing and became the center of Ozzy's world. His life revolved around getting high and blacking out. Band practice wasn't just skipped. It was ruined completely by his no-shows or his stumbling, confused arrivals. Sold-out concerts were barely held together with bandmates spring. He'd be clear-headed enough to get through a show. For Geezer, a man. Hope hit his heart into every Sabbath song, writing poetry from darkness and sadness. Ozzy's downward spiral felt like he was betraying their shared dream. The music they'd built together was constantly being attacked by his unpredictable, explosive behavior. What began as creative arguments turned into all-out war. Angry fights that shook the walls, guitar smashed in rage, and insults thrown with poison that could never be taken back. More than once, tempers exploded into physical fights. Moments where decades of friendship threatened to disappear in a single violent heartbeat. Outside the music, Ozzy's messy love life created its own storm, one that often matched the chaos of his career. His marriage to Sharon Arden would later become one of rock's most famous unions, a crazy partnership built on ambition, control, and a constant tug-of-war for power. Before Sharon, however, Ozzy's love life was already a minefield of messy affairs. Short romances and reckless hookups with groupies that frequently turned into public scandal. Each relationship seemed to carry its own trail of gossip, bitter breakups, and whispered betrayals. Some ended in explosive fights behind hotel doors. Others turned into silent grudges that lasted for years. 2 or 3 weeks later, Bill calls Moop and says, where are you? I said, what do you mean? Where am I? He said, we're here to practice, I said. I thought I was fired. Geezer saw firsthand how intimacy relationships bled into the band's dynamics. Jealousies grew, loyalty shifted, and friendships broke apart. Ozzy's jealous streak went far beyond us lovers. Even close friends could become targets if he suspected betrayal. Lovers and companions were often polento. His personal fights used Aspons in games of control and revenge, leaving a trail of emotional damage it made. The cracks around him even deeper. Ozzy's conflicts weren't limited to Geezer. They spread like wildfire across nearly every corner of his professional life. Within Sabbath, his crass relationship with Tony Iommi became the stuff of rock stories. On stage, the chemistry was electric. Off stage, it was soon endless clash of egos, tempers flaring over creative control, set lists, and even personal insults. These battles often spilled from rehearsal rooms into after-show parties, some time ending with slamming doors or angry walkouts. Beyond Sabbath, Ozzy developed a talent for burning bridges. He clashed with producers over his refusal to compromise. yelled at promoters when things didn't go his way, and dismissed journalists in explosive interviews that made headlines for all the wrong reasons. By the 1980s, his fights had spread into the wider music world. Clashes with fellow rock stars over alleged song stealing, accusations of backstabbing, and feeling disrespected. Some fights erupted publicly in interviews and award show snubs. Others grew in the shadows of green rooms and record label meeting rooms, whether whispered in industry hallways or splashed across the tabloids. They all fed into the same truth. Ozzy had become a one of rock's most unpredictable and difficult people. A man as famous for his conflicts as for his music. Picture these: the lights go out, the amplifierceful silent, the roaring sea of fancy sapiers into the night, and Ozzy Osbourne standing alone, face to face with shadows that have followed him for decades. The spectacle, the snarling theatrics, the bizarre on-stage antics. None of it could hide the truth. Offstage, there were no costumes, no fireworks, no wall of sound to protect them. What he wrestled with was darker than any Sabbath song, more relentless than any touring schedule. His battle wasn't just with fame. It was with himself. Alcohol and hard drugs weren't just indulgences in the typical rock and roll lifestyle. They were chains, cold and unforgiving, wrapped tight around his life. Every drinking binge was another desintento, a place where reason and self-control longer existed. Each scandal thought made its way to the tabloids wasn't a random accident. It was the public flare-up of a private war spiraling out of control. The headlines painted him as unhinged Prince of Darkness. But the truth was more tragic. He was drowning, clawing for air in a world he'd built but could no longer control. At home, the damage was devastating. The Osbourne household was not a safe place. It was a war zone. Violent arguments would erupt like summer storms, sudden and violent, leaving a trail of smashed furniture, broken glass, and words that could never be taken back. The door slammed with such force that walls seemed to shake. Nights passed in tense, icy silence that felt louder than any fight. And through it all, the crack lines in his marriage grew deeper. Sharon's role was a contradiction, part unwavering protector, part fighter in a war neither of them could walk away from. Their love could be fierce and passionate one day, and scorched earth destructive the next. The children were not spared from the damage. Periods of separation cut through their lives like jagged glass, scattering. Every bizarre antic, every screaming match, every weird moment became prime-time comedy. But the cameras didn't capture the full truth. To the outside world, it was eccentric entertainment. To those close enough to see through their cracks, it was a slow-motion disaster. What millions laughed at was for Thefamily, the filming of a long-running tragedy. A household held together not by peace, but by thefrogel, fraying threads of survival, even in rare spells of stability. Tension hummed in the air like a live wire, ready to snap at the slightest tick. The breaking point didn't arrive quietly. It came crashing down like a jaw kicked off its hinges. Between Geezer Butler and Ozzy Osbourne, trust hadn't just faded with time. It had been destroyed, crushed into something unrecognizable. What began as annoyance over missed shows spiraled into something far uglier. The early days when such excitance could be brushed off as rock and roll craziness were long gone. Now, every unexplained disappearance, every last-minute no-show felt like a public embarrassment. Geezer wasn't just left holding the pieces. He was left standing under the spotlight, forced to carry the shame of a bandmate who seemed committed to sink into his own bad habits and drag everyone else down with him. And then came the betrayals that could never be undone. Secret deals, whispered arrangements, and business moves made in the shadows left Geezer feeling less like a partner and more like a target. Each time Ozzy went behind his back, it wasn't just a breach of trust. It was another knife driven deep into what little was left of their bond. The cuts were on purpose, thuans slow to heal. If they ever could, every handshake they offered in public begging to feel like acting. Hollow gestures, hiding a festering hostility. The insults were the final nails in the coffin. Some were tossed casually in interviews, others hurled with poison imminence of anger, but all of them landed with the force of a wrecking ball. These weren't harmless jokes between old friends. They were precision strikes, meant to wound, to remind. The other That's days of loyalty and mutual respect were over. By the time they took the stage together for their much-publicized reunions, the damage was irreversible. The grins they flashed for the cameras were fake, their eyes cold. Every photo op was a performance. Every onstage hug, a silent lie told forth. Sake of the brand, backstage, the truth could no longer be hidden. Their words to each other were shortened business-like, as if they were making deals rather than sharing a life's work. The air between them was thick, heavy with years of unspoken complaints and the echo of too many betrayals. And now, as Geezer strips away the fake front, fans are faced with a reality that hurts. These weren't twa brothers in arms holding the line for heavy metal. They were strangers chained together by a once mighty legacy, dragging it forward, not out of love, but out of duty to a history that had already been broken beyond repair. The golden glow that has long wrapped itself around the name Black Sabbath, shining like a sacred treasure in rock history. This was the band that ripped open the gates of heavy metal, creating an entirely new sound that would echo through stadiums, bedrooms, and rebellious hearts for decades. They were gods on stage, their guitar riffs, the spell of a generation. But peel back that shimmering surface, and what you'll find is not a harmonious brotherhood. It's a battlefield, a silent war zone, with unspoken betrayals, sharp words never forgotten, and the suffocating weight of grudges that refuse to die. Ozzy Osbourne's scandals, some outrageous, others downright self-destructive, were not harmless rock and roll escapades. They were grenades thrown into the very foundations of Sabbath's unity. Every public feud, every outburst, every unpredictablest, didn't just cast a passing shadow. It carved deep, jagged scars into Theban's once perfect legacy. What should have been a saga of solidarity and artistic immortality began to twist into something darker. A cautionary tale of faux fame, unchecked. Indulgence and buried resentments can rot a legacy from inside out. Even the SoCaladrunians, the triumphant tours, the glossy press photos, the staged moments of friendship were more fragile. Thananon dared admit. Behind those smiles were gritted teeth. Behind those handshakes were clenched fists, hidden in pockets. They were ceasefires, not peace treaties. Temporary truces balanced Eden, a razor's edge, ready to collapse under the slightest tremor of ego or bitterness. And now with Geezer Butler pulling back the curtain, there is no denying it. Sabbath's place in music history is secure, but the myth of their unshakable brotherhood has crumbled into dust. Yes, they remain titans, immortal in sound, but that immortality carries with it a haunting shadow, one of broken trust, wasted opportunities, and friendships that could never quite survive the storm they themselves greeted.